So this week we're going to be focusing on pin backs and bezels. The way I have made pin backs for the last 10 years has been like so. Some people don't feel that the double pin back is necessary for a smaller piece of jewelry. They are typically used for bigger and heavier pieces. But what I like about them is that I feel like they don't flip around as much on the body, and they're pretty easy to make. Another option is doing a single stainless steel one. These are a lot trickier, and I personally don't think they look as nice. You are welcome to try whatever you want, but this video is mostly going to be focusing on the double pin back. So the pin back is made out of 3 parts. You got your catch, your tubing, and your pin stems made from stainless steel. What you're looking at right now are 2 examples of tubing. One is called thick wall tubing and the other not as thick. The one on the right, you can see how the diameter of the tubing is thicker than the other. That is ideal for a pin back because stainless steel is steel and it's harder than materials like silver and copper. So by using the thinner wall tubing, over time it could just rip your tubing apart. So that's why it's ideal to use a thicker tube. So I have my piece of cut tubing. I attached a video of how to use a tube cutter. Unfortunately, I don't have one at my home studio, but I refer back to that for how to cut tubing. We have several of them at school, and they're really great. What they do is they help you measure your tubing and hold it down and give you a nice little slit to put your saw blade. So we have that ready to go, and now we're going to talk about the catch. So in all honesty, I kind of use whatever I have laying around. Since you have sheet, what you can do is cut a really thin piece of metal or sheet metal. You can also use wire, whatever. It really doesn't matter. I tend to use wire because I like softer edges, but that's just me and my preference. So since you have sheet, we're gonna play with this a little bit. So basically, my rule of thumb is I like my catch a little bit smaller than my tubing because I feel like it adds a nice looking tension when I set my pins. So this looks like it might be okay. Sometimes I make multiple catches because I want them to look a certain way. So you'll find your style. Where are my round? So I take my round needle nose pliers and I just kind of curl it on the ends. Doesn't have to be much, it just has to be enough where the pin stems have a place to go. And I'm going to pull that back a little bit because I think it's too much. And I just kind of play with them until I'm happy with them, or I start over. I try to make them look even on both sides. You can make them square, you can make them round. Like I said, I tend to like the round look better. It's really up to you. You can also take a piece of sheet and kind of, with the idea that you're going to solder it up and down, and cut into it to kind of create the same shape where there's a space for the pin backs to go. Like I said, it's your style. So this looks pretty good to me. I probably could make the pin stems come in even a little bit more. But then of course I want to make sure that this is flat for when I'm going to solder it to my base. Not perfect, but it looks handmade. And that's just from a thin piece of the 20 gauge sheet. Since you're using copper, you might want to make it a little thicker because copper is so flimsy, but it'll work. So the next part, what we're gonna do is we're going to solder on the tube and the catch. This is my setting and base for my pin back. I decided to frame this because I wanted to still be able to see the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder my tubing here and my catch at the bottom. I tend to do that for all my pin backs because that way I know that the top is going to hang straight. As you can see, this is a relatively thin piece of metal, and with my tubing, that's really all I need to secure it. When using sheet, I use at least 20 gauge or thicker because there's going to be a lot of wear on the tube and the pin back. And then I'm going to solder my catch at the bottom here.
Cut.
Okay, so you might have noticed that my metal isn't perfectly clean because I have some oxidation on the previous solder joints. So I'm leaving those a little dirty, and I spot sanded and cleaned with soap and water the area where my next seam is going to go. By leaving my previous seams a little oxidized, the chances of them reflowing are slimmer. And every time a solder seam reflows, the seam shrinks a little and you lose a little solder. You'll have a lot more space on your pieces to where you can line up your tube and have a little bit more wiggle room. I cut this piece a little small and now I'm paying for it. And I also pre-attached some prongs onto it just to make my job a little bit more difficult because that's what I do. All right. That looks okay. And as you may or may not have seen, I did flux the surface of the metal. And I probably could flux the attachments, but I think there's enough flux on the sheet itself that it'll carry over. Okay. So then I want to take a peek from this angle to see how they line up because, as you know, the pin stems are going to come down this way and here, so I want to make sure it's centered properly. I just eyeball it, to be honest. I don't know how you would measure it when you're on the soldering block, but feel free to try. Sometimes I will go in like this because that's kind of close to how it would be. Often we spend more time setting up for a solder seam than we do actually soldering, right? So take your time and make sure everything is the way you want it. And the longer your flux has to dry, the less it'll bubble and move your things anyway. So it works out. So I think I'm happy enough with this, and I'm going to place my solder. Lost it. Oops. So when placing my solder, I want to place it in the middle of the tubing because the worst thing that could happen to me right now is my solder could flow inside of the tube and that would freeze the joint. And then I wouldn't be able to get any stainless steel in there. And I'd have to either melt my tubing off or, geez, I'm so shaky. I should probably eat something. Holy cow. Good thing I'm not doing surgery. Okay. So I spot cleaned this area again, and I have it placed in a way where it's pretty centered with the tubing. I put my solder, you can use easy at this point. I've had a lot of instances where I have melted parts of the curve and had to restart. So if you're going to use easy solder, this is the time. So I'm just generally heating things up. I want to avoid putting too much heat over here, and I left it dirty because I really don't want it to flow again. And of course my solder moved on me, so I'm going to go and push it back up against my catch. Also looks like it isn't straight anymore. You see, that looks like that almost melted on me. So I'm trying to focus my heat on the bottom because since my solder is over here, I'm trying to pull it under and through to the other side. And I did it from this direction too, so that heat wouldn't be going near my tube. I think I got it. Yeah. So that's exactly what happened. It went through the bottom and through the other side. Now I want to just look over here to make sure I got it all. Could be a little flatter there, but it'll do.
Action.
Okay, the next thing I want to do is kind of give the edges of the tubing a little bevel for the stainless to sit in nicely. With this one, I used a tool we have at school called a miter jig. And I put it in there and filed it at an angle. I normally do like doing it that way, but I've kind of gone away from it because A, I don't have a miter jig, and B, it makes it so much more complicated to solder because it wants to roll around. And then that way, if it does roll, you have a bit bigger problem since you already filed your little slits. I guess they're not slits, more like slants or whatever. So what I've been doing is I've been soldering it first, and then I've been coming in with my little disc sander on my flex shaft. And what I do is I try to angle it in a way to get just the tip of the tubing. And you could also do this with a file. But what I like about it is that it's pretty straight. So you can try it one of the three ways. By putting it in the miter jig first before soldering it, or filing it with your needle file just at an angle, or sanding it with a disc. I'm not positive if we have those for you at school, but I will check. Now I'm looking for one of my needle files. So basically, same kind of idea where you would kind of just come in at an angle and just do the edges. And I don't have much to take off since I just did it with the sanding disc, but just same idea. Just gives it like a little more room when you set the stainless pins. Okay, so now I'm ready to set my pin stem. So this is a piece of stainless steel wire. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to kind of eyeball it and measure it. So the point is, you don't want the point sticking out farther than your catch. So I'm going to look at it from here and here. So I'm going to bend it here. Normally I don't worry about measuring at all because I just cut off whatever's extra. But since I have such a small piece, I'm a little nervous about having enough. So I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. So I'm going to take one side and I'm going to bend it at a 90-degree angle. So basically I'm just going to take my pliers and push it up. And then I can always adjust it a little bit. Super special. And now I'm going to put the other end through my tube. Gotta buy some new stainless. Okay. And now I'm going to come in here with my pliers and bend it up and hope that I don't rip off my tube and bend the other one up. Usually the stainless is a little straighter than this. This is some old stuff. Okay. So now that this is like that, you can test out how it looks in your catch. And I have plenty. What a relief. And then I'm going to come in with some snips. Do not use your good snips that you use for like silver and copper and all that. Because even with stainless on stainless, you might chip your tool. So use a pair of snips that are strictly for steel. Mine are in that bin. And I can never do this, but this is some thinner stuff, so I might be okay. Are you still rolling?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, so I'm just going to go in right where they end. It probably could be even just a smidge shorter, but I'm going to come in and file it so it's not a big deal.
Ow.
Safety glasses are smart. That's still a little too long because the time passed. So I'm going to snip them a little bit more, and I'm actually going to take it out just to make sure. That's better. Still a little. That's fine. Okay. And now I'm going to file them so they're pointy and go through your shirt easy. So just to go over, give a nice point. And then I kind of go over it again so that it's not like gonna kill you. Even though I spent a lot of time pointing it, I want to take